Hey, internet. I I was watching the supplemental video that I did about my situation, my academic background, how I got into academia, the problems I had, and so forth. Something that I noticed in reviewing that, I just, uh, I guess I omitted, not necessarily intentionally, but somewhat subconsciously, is another layer of that situation, which I believe contributed to what happened and the way that it happened and so forth. And that is my lifelong struggle with anxiety disorder, and more particularly the processes um, that I underwent in revealing this and so forth. So, Uh, anxiety disorder is a psychological condition. At least, partially has to do with chemical, but it's not purely physiological. I have exhibited traits of this all my life, although growing up I didn't know what it was or what to call it and so forth. It's a personality disorder, so there's a cluster, a constellation of things. I perhaps somewhat egotistically like to think that this has to do with my high level of intellect, that it comes with these, this baggage, you might say, the good side and the bad side of being intelligent and so forth. And I think with the anxieties, because I also have OCD tendencies, particularly noticing patterns, things like that. Like I was kind of joking with Lauren because we have three lights in our bathroom, and she commented the other day how she thinks it's too bright and she wanted less light in there. So I came in a couple days later, and she had unscrewed slightly two of the light bulbs, so only one of the lights was on, but it was the left light, and I immediately screwed it in and unscrewed it and screwed in the middle one because I couldn't handle having just the one on the left. It had to be the middle one, and that's the OCD stuff. But on the other hand, it makes me a better editor because I can look at a page of text and within about 30 seconds typically tell you there's a misspelled word, there's an editing error there, so it makes me a very efficient and high quality editor. But I also have to rearrange things. If there's a picture on the wall that's, a little 1 degree off, I will correct it because I have to maintain that. Um, but the anxiety disorder, well, I think it also has to do with, intelligence and so forth. But there's an empathic aspect as well. So anxiety disorder can present itself in a number of ways, and so it's been cataloged according to different nomenclature, depending on kind of the way in which it manifests. I tend to have what's called generalized anxiety disorder, and that is a, an overwhelming feeling of doom, and you feel like you're being crushed. Um, you tend to kind of feel like life is too much, like you have a threshold that's being broken. Um, the the product of, so everyone has anxiety. I mean, that's one of the things about this, of course, is that it is it's a generalized psychological phenomenon, and that everybody has anxiety. And it's one of those things also that sometimes it doesn't manifest until something horrifying happens in your life. You lose somebody, or something catastrophic happens, and then it manifests, and you've never felt it before. I've experienced it since childhood, and um, for me, it manifests in having almost like seizures. An anxiety panic attack um, is where you become so overwhelmed that it manifests differently in different people. For me, it's shortness of breath, pounding chest, feels like you're having a heart attack. In fact, I had a particularly severe one, not quite a year ago, and was for a moment considering, should I go, call the, should I call 911 or something, because it felt like I was having a heart attack. I felt like I might be dying. It feels that, extreme. And um, as a child, it would manifest that I would ball up and kind of hit the ground, hyperventilating. It didn't happen like regularly, so it was never diagnosed. For me, different people have different triggers. Um, for me, I can generally handle most of life's stresses without getting too worked up about it. Generally speaking, I've, you know, become very adept at managing my disorder and being able to see when it's happening. And there's all sorts of techniques. When I was in college is when I got actually diagnosed with this, and um, kind of came to terms with it and learned coping strategies and so forth for how to react to it, how to calm yourself down, removing yourself from situations, breathing techniques, mental techniques, and so forth. So I've and generally speaking, I've never really talked to anybody about it other than professional counselor and my wife, maybe close friends. It's not something that was generally broadcast. I didn't just talk about it casually with people for obvious reasons, because there's a lot of stigma associated with psychological disorders, even in this day and age. And so I always kind of kept it quiet to myself and just dealt with it. And from the outside, people wouldn't notice that anything was weird or wrong about me. Um, so I'd managed it for a long time. But the specific trigger for me is a feeling of helplessness. So it manifested most readily in my teenage years after the death of my father, and I had a lot of social struggles with my stepfather, who at the time I felt was kind of unleashed on me because my father was no longer, even though he was not physically there, he was still a social presence in my life after he died. It got really bad, and anxiety goes hand in hand with depression. In fact, it was being diagnosed with depression in college that led to the underlying condition of anxiety disorder, which was causing my depressive moods and thoughts and so forth. Um, and so, uh, the coming to terms with this, not being diagnosed with it, my teenage years, it was the worst because I mean, nobody, my parents, my mom, my stepdad, they didn't know, they didn't have classification or any, understanding of what was happening. But when I had a feeling of helplessness, particularly this sense of arbitrary rules, unjust sentencing, that sort of a feel, when it's just do as I say because I'm telling you to do it. That kind of an approach has always rubbed me. I mean, to say it rubs me the wrong way is putting it very, very mildly. It gives me anxiety attacks to, uh, you know, um, and it's psychologists refer to it as a fight or flight response that you, and my natural inclination is to fight. I want to punch somebody or something when the anxiety manifests, but I am not a violent person, and so I usually end up turning all that energy inward, which causes the meltdown. And the so it goes hand in hand, and again, it's that feeling of helplessness, of having unjust authority over you. That's the trigger for me, and so I can cope with the day-to-day stressors, and I'm not always the greatest dad because sometimes I snap at my children, and but I can usually catch myself when I feel that fight or flight happening, when you feel that rising. It's like a thermometer rising, and I can feel it, and you detach yourself from the situation, calm yourself down. And so I'm generally good at doing that. um, the tying this into everything that happened with me at the college and the loss of my job and so forth. So the chair of the department, as I indicated in the previous video, he and I had worked together for years. He came 2-3 years after I had been teaching there. Um, but we've worked together for years, and it was fine as colleagues, but very different ideological perspectives. Again, I am theological, In terms of my training, it's, within an ecumenical but still Christian environment. I'm doing Christian theology, which is to say that I'm reading the Bible as a believer through the hermeneutics of faith, right? Now, that doesn't mean I can't learn from and understand secular approaches and benefit from reading them, and I do, and I always have, and um, so forth and so on. So I've always been live and let live and tried to look at the dialogue between secular and, you know, and confessional approaches to religious studies as a cooperative endeavor. Well, as things started to change and his outlook seemed to become more and more aggressive, and the way in which he, um, you know, uh, encountered me and dealt with me, I felt more and more that over the years that he was specifically taking aim at the fact that I was a Christian. So 3, 4 years ago was the first, after he had become chair and after the other member of the department, who they had always kind of been the back and forth. It was always between them, and I was the guy getting the PhD, so I was doing my own thing because I had a family. I was getting the PhD, so I wasn't like living my office type, right? I would go and do my office hours, and then I'd go home. But the two of them would just hours and hours and hours, go back and forth, and it was great to listen to them. It was like jousting. And but after the other member left, then there was no more of that. There was no more discussion, um, and so the chair, the first indication to me that something was awry was in one of his first faculty reviews, so the chair's review of me as a faculty member. Um, he made this comment about me not understanding the difference between being religious and doing religious studies. And I pointed that out to the dean at the time, and I thought that this was inappropriate and strange because there was no indication, there was no actual data to support that. There was hearsay because he heard from a student who thought this. Okay, but you know, you're talking statistics. If you're putting in reviews, you need to have evals and not just a comment here or there, but a statistical trend, right? Well, I thought that was strange because I could easily and quickly articulate the difference, and I understand that a person's confessional status does have significant conditioning factors on how they read and interpret texts, and that it is instructive to have a purely academic environment wherein you're not demonstrating in terms of normatively demonstrating a singular perspective, but rather teaching the students to develop their own perspective. That's always been how I approached. And I had plenty of secular students over the years who told me how much they appreciated that. They came into the classroom kind of sheepish, not knowing if, because they're generally outnumbered in this area demographically. Most of our students are Christian and, generally speaking, conservative Christian. So, the secular humanist type students that came in the class, they were vastly outnumbered, and I went out of my way to try to make them feel comfortable and try to help them to grow in their own perspectives, help them seek the questions they were seeking, while of course there's a common curriculum. Everybody's learning the data of biblical studies, the dates, the names, the places, the people, all the important stuff. So everybody's learning that, but how they apply it in their lives, that's for them. And I tried to foster a inclusive, supportive environment where nobody felt ostracized for asking questions that were of interest to them. And and I heard from multiple students over the years how this particular professor does not have that kind of a classroom, that he's very belittling and demeaning, particularly to students of faith, particularly those that, are confessional in the way that they present themselves. And so that was like the first indicator to me that something was going downhill. Well, as this progressed, this increasingly, it was like a noose around my neck. Not only did I have all the pressures of completing my PhD, trying to raise children who are crazy. I love them to death, but small children are crazy and very, very difficult as a parent with anxiety disorder to deal sometimes with the sudden interruptions, the extremely loud noise, the just unpredictability of children. Again, I love them. They're, some of the most important things in my life, but um, some days I have to go and lock myself in the bathroom and get away because I have to calm myself down because it's so ridiculous dealing with the irrationality of toddlers. And so, in addition to all the pressures of trying to be a full-time professor and a full-time dad and a full-time, graduate student, a full-time husband, all these things piling up. Oh, and by the way, your department chair is antagonistic to the fact that you are a confessional Christian. And what are you going to do about that? The increasingly it was this presentation of ideas that being a Christian invalidated your ability to study Christianity. And my perspective is most people, not all, but most people that get into the study of religion do so to study their own religion, right? To better understand what they believe and how they believe it. And while comparative studies is important and a necessary aspect to that, I think the motivator for a large segment, if not the majority, of students seeking out, the study of religion is they're trying to understand their own belief patterns. For me, I was trying to understand, what is truth, what is the nature of existence, is the Bible inspired revelation from God? How do we know that? Is it historically accurate? Is it scientifically accurate? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, because I want to know if what I believe is true or not. And so that was the motivator for me. And I believe that I connected with a lot of my students who were there for the same reasons. And then to be told that being a Christian made it so I couldn't teach religious studies, and it never is exactly in those words, but that is the idea that is being expressed. There's all this technical jargon that the religious studies community has standardized as a way of kind of dancing around this idea. And not all, to be clear, not all religious studies people are like this. There are plenty out there who are live and let live and see a cooperative development with theological-oriented scholars, but this particular fellow is not, and he seemed to make it his personal mission to just drive me to the edge of madness, because after the noose had gotten so tight that I started having anxiety attacks, I confessed this, as in I finally made it public. I, in a sense, came out of the closet, so to speak, about my psychological condition. Um, I created a group actually on Facebook to help articulate and commiserate with others that have this and supportive folks that want to support us in our struggles with it, which was very helpful. But, I told him specifically directly and multiple times the way in which he speaks to me, the way in which he addresses me, which I found very demeaning and derogatory. All the statements like, you can't understand what I'm saying. Yes, I understand what you're saying. I disagree. There is a difference between misunderstanding and disagreement. And just being treated like I'm inferior and I just can't get it because I don't have the right nuts and bolts or whatever, that way of approaching me was literally damaging my psyche, that it was causing me to have anxiety attacks because I could feel the direction. This was a probably 3 to 4 year process, and I could feel where it was going, and I could feel what he was doing, and the way that he was trying to damage my reputation through these weird attacks and all this, it was just this constant barrage. And I tried to engage with the administration and make it an issue of, look, this is psychologically damaging me. The way in which I'm being treated by this individual, which I've never been treated like this before in my entire life, is, except maybe by my stepfather, and he meant well. He had to be the commander of the house, but the way in which I'm being treated is hurting me. It is physiologically damaging me. That, I am having the psychological version of a heart attack, and the the response I got is, "Oh, I'm sorry you're having so much anxiety." Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that I'm overstressed. I am overstressed because look at my life, and on top of the anxiety cake, you're then pouring gasoline because this guy is constantly attacking me, the way in which he's addressing me, and he would come into the building and slam his door and stuff like that, and just it was creating a hostile work environment, which was making it very hard for me to work. And I tried to articulate all of this. I tried to, ask for any sort of support, and I just, I'm sorry you feel that way is basically what I was told. And I have no idea because I was not part of any of the conversations that led to my being laid off, but I can't help but think that that was part of the equation that went into this. Now, I say that in purely just speculative mood, right? I'm not saying anything official or on the record. It's just my personal impression of the situation is that contributed to me being let go. Because I was perceived as a problem and so forth. Now, I say all of that because legally speaking, they couldn't do that. The fact that, and I even thought about, should I pursue legal action over this? And I didn't, no, it's just headache, and I'm the little guy, I get squashed like a bug. I'm just going to take my severance and say thank you and, try to go in grace. But, it felt personal. It felt like I was being personally attacked and particularly selected for, not only for being, perceived as being uppity because me, a lowly instructor, was disagreeing with the definitions and, ideological presentation of ideas being set forward by the department chair, and to disagree is to disobey somehow, even though we're academics. And that I think this was just, I was the squeaky wheel. I was making too much noise, and so I don't know. Who knows? It could have been purely monetary. I have no idea because I wasn't part of that conversation. But the anxiety disorder is particularly tough to deal with in a situation like that where you feel powerless. And, in a sense, it was lifting of a burden to be let go because at least I'm not having to lick his boot heels anymore, which is what I felt like I was having to do. The way in which I was having to kowtow to his definitions and his choices. I couldn't disagree with anything. So at least I don't have to do that anymore. It's like have a salary and benefits, but have to be miserable, or be free and have no money or benefits. So, and I'm just, kind of caricaturing the situation, but, but yeah, that's, I thought I would, part of me coming to terms with this more recently has been to make it public, um, and I really hope that in some small way I can contribute to our cultural perceptions shifting on this issue, because we all have psychological conditions. Don't delude yourself into thinking that anyone has a purely clean bill of health. We all have issues, and we have to come to terms with that. It's very close to the Christian Gospel's idea that we're all sinners, right? So before you start stigmatizing your neighbor for their issues, start worrying about your own issues. And I think that we should try to emphasize empathy. And that was the thing that astonished me through that whole process, was the utter lack of empathy. Um, you know, Little patronizing, "Oh, I hope you feel better," stuff like that. But it's like, I would rather you say nothing than say something patronizing. I felt no empathy coming from the people that I was trying to reach out to, and and it seemed like the attempt itself just marked me with a target, because it's like, once it was almost like handing this fellow a loaded gun, and because once he knew what to do, which was to take away my choice and freedom to arbitrate things that he knew I didn't like, I mean, it was like shooting gallery all of a sudden. Um, and so I felt very victimized by the. It took a lot for me to admit what was happening to me in that situation, for me to admit that I was being damaged, that it hurt, that I was having these anxiety attacks, that I felt like I was, you know, literally dying because of the way in which I was being treated, and so forth. Um, and then to just not have any real supportive empathic responses was just an extra layer of, you know of hurt and pain and suffering. And so hopefully, if people watch this, I hope that you can find comfort, and I hope that you can deal with the situations that you find yourselves in. um, I know that I struggled mightily these last years, and it has been a very difficult process. But I'm still up, still going, trying to find a way forward. If this salvage business works out, who knows? Maybe I'll be a successful self-employed person, and then I won't have to worry about that feeling of you know being constrained by the unjust authority of a boss who doesn't like you, something like that. So anyway, I guess I'll leave it there at this point. I'm just kind of rambling, but um, I do hope that this maybe raises a little bit of visibility and awareness of what anxiety disorder is, and how it is just it's something that we should try to empathize with and understand, and not stigmatize, which I feel our society has done too much of late.